A poor little girl waits for days outside a restaurant, but when the young billionaire asks why, she answers, "My mum said she'd come back to get me, but she disappeared." And what he does next shocks everyone. A light drizzle fell over the city, like a thin veil. It wasn't heavy enough to drench anyone, but persistent enough to be bothersome. Silas adjusted the collar of his coat as he stepped out of his car. He was 52, with grey at his temples and an expression that wavered between fatigue and indifference. As he did every evening, he parked his Mercedes in the reserved spot behind his most profitable restaurant, Lumière. There it was a ritual, nightly visits to his 5 establishments to make sure everything was running as it should. He didn't need to do it. He had competent managers, but the routine kept him busy, filling empty spaces he didn't know how else to fill. "Good evening, Mr. Russell," the valet greeted, handing him the umbrella Silas never remembered to bring. "Good evening, Dean." Silas made his way through the back entrance, offering brief hellos to the kitchen staff. The executive chef, Marcel, was in the middle of an energetic explanation about the ideal temperature for the special sauce of the night. Silas didn't interfere. His presence was noted but not intrusive, exactly how he liked it. He continued down the hallway until he reached the main dining area. Lumière was elegant without being pretentious. Amber lighting, well-spaced tables, background music at the perfect volume. It was packed, as it always was on Fridays. Lively conversations blended with the clinking of silverware and glasses. "Mr. Russell, we weren't expecting you tonight," said Elaine, the manager, approaching him with a professional smile. She had worked for him for 8 years and was extremely competent. "Just the usual visit," he replied, his eyes already scanning the dining room, checking details. A table waiting to be cleared, a bottle of wine being served incorrectly, a waiter walking too fast. "We had a slight issue with the truffle supplier, but it's all settled. And the critic from the City Review was here last night. He was impressed with our new tasting menu." Elaine's voice faded when Silas noticed something through the front window. Outside, partially sheltered by the awning, sitting on a small bench near the entrance, was a child. "Who is that girl?" he interrupted, pointing discreetly. Elaine followed his gaze and sighed. "Oh, her. It's a complicated situation. The hostess can explain better." Silas felt a twinge of irritation. He disliked problems at the door of his restaurants, especially ones visible to customers. He walked to the entrance, where Vanessa, a woman in her early 30s, managed reservations with calculated efficiency. "Good evening, Mr. Russell. That child outside." "What's going on?" Vanessa lowered her voice, leaning slightly over the marble counter. "She's been there for days." "Days?" Silas frowned. "And no one did anything?" "We did. We tried talking to her several times, offered her food, called social services yesterday. But she runs off when strangers approach. She says her mum will come back for her and that she can't leave. And the police. They came yesterday, but they said they can't just take her by force. They need a warrant or a social worker present. They promised to come back today, but so far..." Silas looked again at the girl. She was small, with brown hair tied in a poorly made ponytail. She wore a coat that seemed too big for her and was hugging a brown teddy bear worn from time and use. Even from a distance, she looked tired. "How old do you think she is? 8? 9? "She seems younger. 5 or 6, maybe. Hard to say. She doesn't talk much." The drizzle intensified, and the girl huddled even closer to the small dry spot under the awning. Something about that scene got under Silas's skin. It wasn't just pity. It was a strange restlessness, as if someone had opened a drawer he'd kept locked for a very long time. "Keep attending to our guests," he said to Vanessa, and without thinking too much, he walked outside. The cold night air hit him immediately. Silas approached slowly, trying not to startle the girl. "Hi," he said, stopping a few steps away. "It's cold out here." The child looked up at him. Her eyes were large and dark against her pale skin. She didn't show fear, only a careful caution, like a small animal deciding whether to run. "I can't come in," she replied in a clear voice, surprisingly firm for someone so small. "My mom said to wait here." Silas hesitated. He didn't know how to talk to children. They were uncharted territory for him, with rules he'd never learned. His adult life was filled with business meetings, contracts, professional relationships, everything standardized, predictable. Children were the opposite of all that. "I'm Silas. This restaurant is mine," he said, choosing direct honesty. "Can I sit down?" The girl clutched her teddy bear tighter but nodded. Silas sat at the edge of the bench, leaving plenty of space between them. Up close, he noticed the small freckles on her nose, the mended fabric of her fingerless gloves, the worn-out sneakers that were nonetheless carefully cleaned. "What's your name?" "Maisie," she replied, then added, "I'm 5.5. The half mattered, Silas realized. It was the assertion of someone who needs every fraction of her age to be taken seriously. "Nice to meet you, Maisie. And who's your friend?" he asked, pointing to the teddy bear. "His name is Button." "Because he lost an eye, see?" She showed him the bear, which indeed had only one black button eye on the right side. The other was gone, leaving just some stitching where it used to be. "But he doesn't mind. He says that way he can blink all the time." Silas couldn't help a small smile. There was something about a child's logic that made tragedies more bearable. "That's a good way to look at things," he agreed. After a pause, he asked, "Maisie, the lady inside told me you've been here for a few days. Is that true?" The girl counted on her fingers, frowning in concentration. 1, 2, 3. 3 days. My mom said I had to wait here. She went to fix a problem and said she'd come back for me. Must be a pretty big problem." Maisie nodded solemnly. "Yeah, she said it was really important and that I had to be brave." "And you are being brave," Silas noted. "Are you hungry?" "Cold." "Sometimes. The people in the restaurant gave me sandwiches and hot chocolate earlier." She gestured to the restaurant door. "The lady with red hair was really nice." Vanessa, with her bright red hair. Silas made a mental note to thank her later. "Where do you sleep?" "Over there." Maisie pointed to a small nook between the bench and the wall. "Button takes care of me. He doesn't sleep, you know. He keeps his eyes open all night." Silas felt a tightening in his chest. He pictured this little girl curled up in that cramped space during cold nights, alone, relying solely on her mother's word. A grim thought crossed his mind. What if her mother didn't come back? "How about we go inside? It's warmer in there, and we can wait for your mom together. I'm sure she'd understand." Maisie shook her head firmly. "I can't. She told me to wait here." She pointed to the ground under her feet, as if it were the most specific spot in the world. "If I leave, she might not find me. Then I'd be alone forever." A child's logic was simultaneously fragile and unshakable. Silas took a deep breath, trying to decide what to do. "Does your mom have a phone? Or maybe you know where you guys live?" "We live in the yellow apartment near the park, but we move a lot," she explained with the simplicity of someone who doesn't fully grasp how precarious that is. "We've lived in 3 different places just this year. Why so many moves?" "Mom says we're looking for the perfect place," she shrugged. "She said this restaurant is a good place because it has pretty lights and smells good." Silas glanced at the restaurant, trying to see it through the eyes of a mother desperate for a safe spot to leave her daughter. Well lit, busy, in a respectable commercial area. If she had nowhere else to go or no one to turn to. "What about your dad?" he asked, aware he was treading on uncertain ground. "I don't have one," Maisie replied with the same simplicity one might use to describe the color of the sky or the name of an animal. Silas nodded, not pressing further. Through the window, he could see Vanessa discreetly watching them, probably concerned. He gave her a quick nod to show everything was fine. "Maisie, do you think your mum would be upset if I took you somewhere warm just for tonight?" He tried again. "It's a special place for kids, with other boys and girls. People who can look after you until she comes back." The girl's eyes widened in a mix of fear and confusion. "But what if she comes back and I'm not here?" "We'll leave a note, really big, with my phone number," he explained, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "If she shows up, she'll know exactly where to find you. I can even leave someone here to wait for her." Maisie bit her lip, clearly torn. "Is it far?" "Not too far, and we can come back tomorrow to check if she appeared." Maisie fell silent for a moment, as if weighing the proposal with all the seriousness her 5 years would allow. Her gaze flicked between the restaurant and the little spot where she had spent the last few nights. "Button is really cold," she said finally, looking at the teddy bear. "I think he's getting sick." Silas took that as a disguised surrender. "Then let's fix that," he said, getting up and extending his hand. To his surprise, Maisie slipped her small hand into his without hesitation. The trust of a child toward a complete stranger unsettled him more than it comforted him. How many times had she done this before? "Wait, I need to leave a note for my mum," Maisie said suddenly, pulling her hand back. Silas agreed. They went into the restaurant, where Vanessa promptly offered paper and pen. With her tongue poking out in concentration, Maisie drew what looked like herself and the teddy bear, then handed the paper to Silas. "Can you write?" "I know how to read, but I don't know how to write very well yet." Silas took the pen and wrote as Maisie dictated. "Mom, I went somewhere warm with Mr. Silas. Button was cold. Please come soon. Love, Maisie." He added his own phone number and the restaurant's address. "Is this okay?" he asked, showing her the note. She nodded solemnly. Vanessa helped him tape the note to the door, so anyone arriving and asking about a child would see it immediately. "Elaine, please pack a hot meal to go," Silas said. "And Vanessa, if anyone comes looking for Maisie, call me immediately, no matter the hour." "Yes, sir." While they waited for the food, Maisie sat on a chair in the lobby, her legs swinging above the floor. Her eyes wandered curiously, but without the typical childish delight over something new. There was a kind of careful reserve in her expression, as though she was used to not getting too excited about anything. Silas made a few calls, using contacts at City Hall to find a shelter that could take the girl in temporarily. His status as a prominent businessman in the city opened doors that might otherwise remain closed at this hour. "Do you have a lot of restaurants?" Maisie asked when he hung up. "5. "Wow," she said, eyes widening slightly. "You must really like food." "Actually, I like making things work," he answered honestly. "Seeing a place full of happy people, like a party. Something like that." Elaine returned with a bag containing a container of hot soup, a sandwich, and a slice of apple pie. Silas thanked her and grabbed his coat. "Shall we go?" Maisie hopped off the chair and took his hand again. They walked to his car, where he fastened her seatbelt as best he could, although he didn't have a proper child seat. It was a short trip, and the alternative was leaving her to spend another night in the cold. She ate in silence in the passenger seat, with Button carefully placed beside her. Under the glow of the dashboard, she looked even smaller, as though she might vanish at any moment. "It's a good place, Maisie. There are kind people and a warm bed," Silas said as he drove through the wet city streets. "How long will I stay there?" It was a simple question without a simple answer. "Just until we find out where your mom is." "She'll come back," Maisie said with absolute certainty. "She always keeps her promises." Something in that statement made Silas grip the wheel harder. A memory, maybe. An echo of something he himself might have once said, long ago. "Does your mum usually keep her promises?" "Always," Maisie answered without a moment's hesitation. "One time she promised to take me to the zoo when she had some money, and it took a long time, but we went. And she promised we'd one day have a house of our own, without sharing with other people." "And do you?" "Not yet, but it'll happen. She said so." The unshakable conviction in her voice was both moving and devastating. Silas didn't respond. What could he say? The shelter was an old building but well kept. A discreet sign out front read, "Sunshine Temporary Shelter." There were bars on the windows, but painted in bright colors, a small attempt to hide their true purpose. A middle-aged woman named Rosa greeted them at the entrance. She had a warm smile and knowing eyes, the kind of person who has seen everything but hasn't lost her ability to care. "You must be Maisie," she said, crouching to the child's eye level. "That's a lovely teddy bear you have." Maisie drew closer to Silas, gripping his coat sleeve. "His name is Button. He only has one eye, but he doesn't mind. He pretends he's winking all the time." Rosa smiled, joining the child's imaginative logic with ease. "That's very clever of him. I wish I could wink all the time too. Must be fun." The tension in Maisie's shoulders seemed to lessen a bit. Silas watched their interaction. impressed by Rosa's natural gift for navigating a child's world, a skill he definitely lacked. She led them down a corridor decorated with colorful drawings. Through half-open doors, Silas caught glimpses of other children, some playing, some reading, some simply sitting and staring at nothing. "We have a room with other girls, Maisie's age," Rosa explained. "It's clean, warm and safe. We also have clothes for her." "Just for tonight," Maisie whispered to Silas. "Until my mom comes back, right?" Silas felt a lump in his throat. "Right," he replied, knowing it was probably a lie. Rosa showed them the room where Maisie would stay. It had 4 small beds, walls painted a pale yellow, and some toys organized on shelves. 2 other girls, slightly older than Maisie, were already there, eyeing the newcomer with polite curiosity. "This is Lucy and this is Zoe," Rosa introduced. "Girls, this is Maisie and her friend Button. She'll be staying with us for a while." "Hi," Lucy, about 8, greeted. "Do you want to see my collection of shiny rocks?" The invitation seemed to relax Maisie a bit more. Children have that ability, Silas thought, to accept the unacceptable, to keep going when adults might freeze. "I'll let you settle in," Silas said, feeling oddly reluctant to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow to see how you're doing." "All right?" Maisie nodded solemnly. Then, in a sudden move, hugged Silas's legs. "Thank you for helping me and Button." Silas hesitated, then placed a hand on the top of the child's head in an awkward gesture. "You're welcome, Maisie." Out in the corridor, Rosa walked him to the exit. "She seems to be coping well," she commented. "Maybe too well." Rosa nodded, understanding. Children in unstable situations often develop remarkable resilience, but that doesn't mean they're not hurting inside. "We'll follow the standard procedure," she explained. "Check missing children's records, notify social services. If the mother doesn't show up within 72 hours, the case goes to family court." "Then what?" "It depends. Foster care, most likely, until the family situation is clarified." Silas nodded, leaving his card with Rosa. "Please let me know if anything comes up, and take good care of her." "We always do, Mr. Russell." The drive back to his apartment was silent. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under the nightlights. Silas parked in the garage of the upscale building where he lived and took the elevator up to the penthouse. The apartment was spacious, minimalist, and meticulously tidy. Not for aesthetic reasons, but because almost nothing there was ever truly used. The gourmet kitchen rarely saw any action beyond breakfast. The living room, with its Italian designer sofa, served mainly as a place to review contracts. Most rooms went untouched for days, a life arranged around emptiness. Silas poured himself a drink and walked to the window. Below, the city pulsed with its own stories. How many were like Maisie's? How many mothers had disappeared? How many broken promises? "She always keeps her promises." The phrase echoed again, opening a fissure in some deep part of him. Silas closed his eyes, and the memory struck, not as a polite visitor, but as an intruder forcing its way in. He was 7, sitting on the front steps of a modest house in the suburbs, a little wooden train in his hands, spinning the wheels obsessively, waiting. "Wait here, Silas. Mom's going to take care of some things and come back for you, I promise." She had seemed nervous that day, agitated. She checked her purse several times, fiddled with her hair repeatedly, but she'd smiled at him before leaving, a smile that promised everything would be okay, and he believed her. Why wouldn't he? Hours turned into a day into 2. Neighbors fed him. Someone called the police. A social worker came to pick him up, explaining that his mother couldn't come back right then, that maybe she was sick, that maybe she needed help. She'll be back. She always keeps her promises, but she never did, and after a while he stopped waiting. The promise became just another disappointment in a growing collection for a boy who learned too soon not to trust. Then came the temporary shelters, the foster families. Some good, some not so good. Eventually, the determination to build a life where he didn't need anyone, where promises had no power over him. Silas opened his eyes, returning to the present. The ice in his glass had melted. diluting the drink he hadn't even tasted. He set it on the coffee table and sat down, feeling the weight of something he couldn't name. Why did this child affect him so much? He'd seen worse situations. He'd donated generously to charities that cared for at-risk children. But something about Maisie cut through his carefully constructed defenses. Maybe the similarity of their circumstances. Maybe the contrast in their reactions. Maisie waiting outside the restaurant. Maisie counting on her fingers. 3 days. Maisie hugging a one-eyed teddy bear. Maisie saying with absolute conviction, "She'll come back." And the most painful difference, Maisie believed. She truly believed. That childhood certainty Silas had lost so early, or maybe had never fully had. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. For a moment, his heart leapt, thinking it might be Rosa with news about Maisie, but it was just one of his managers, with a question about the weekend's inventory. After dealing with the issue, Silas checked if there were any missed calls from the shelter. Nothing. He put the phone back on the table, knowing he should get on with his life, that he'd already done more than most would have. The girl was safe now. The authorities would do their job. It wasn't his problem. He got ready for bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, haunted by dark, trusting eyes, by small hands clutching a one-eyed teddy bear, by a child's voice saying, "She always keeps her promises." Maybe it was just a sad coincidence that fate had brought Maisie to his restaurant. Maybe he was just projecting, seeing parallels where there were none. Or maybe it was something else, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. They just lie dormant until something awakens them. When he finally slept, he didn't dream of the abandoned boy he'd once been. He dreamed of Maisie, small and sure, sitting in the rain, hugging a one-eyed teddy bear, absolutely convinced that some promises really are kept. And for the first time in a long while, Silas hoped she was right. Her mother never came back, but maybe, just maybe, Maisie's would be different. Silas adjusted his tie for the 3rd time before getting out of the car. He was parked in front of the Sunshine Temporary Shelter, exactly 12 minutes early, just sitting there convincing himself there was nothing strange about what he was doing. "I just want to see how she's doing," he muttered to himself. Anyone would do the same, but he knew that wasn't true. Most people would have made a phone call or at most sent someone from their staff to check. They wouldn't show up in person on the 3rd consecutive day, holding a small teddy bear in a paper bag. This teddy bear had 2 eyes, unlike Button. Silas thought they might be friends. Rosa greeted him at the reception with a smile that was part surprise, part approval. "Mr. Russell, we weren't expecting you today." "I was in the area," he lied, even though the shelter was a 40-minute drive from his office. "Thought I'd see how Maisie is doing." "She's in the backyard with the other children," Rosa said, motioning for him to follow. "Want to know something funny? She asked about you this morning." Those words stirred a strange feeling in Silas's chest, something warm and unsettling but not unpleasant. The backyard was a modest but well-kept space, a small playground with swings and a slide, a few trees offering shade in the afternoon sun. About 10 kids were playing, watched by 2 staff members. Silas spotted Maisie immediately. She was sitting on a bench by herself, focused on a drawing pad. Button, the one-eyed bear, rested faithfully beside her. "She's a quiet child," Rosa said. "She doesn't join in much, but the therapists say it's normal, given the circumstances." Silas nodded, only half listening. Something in Maisie's posture, in the way she kept slightly apart from the other kids, touched a deeply buried memory. He had been like that too, watching from a distance, never truly participating. Maisie noticed him first. She lifted her eyes from the sketchpad, casually scanned the yard, then froze at the sight of him. For a moment, she just stared, as if making sure it was really him. Then she smiled. It wasn't a polite smile, the kind adults teach children to give when they meet someone. It was a genuine grin that lit up her whole face and reached her eyes, a smile of true recognition and joy. Silas realized he was smiling back before he even knew it. "Mr. Silas," she called out, closing the sketchpad and running toward him, button secure in one hand. "You came back." The surprise in her voice was tangible, as though, despite asking about him, she hadn't really expected him to show up. "I said I would, didn't I?" he replied, surprising himself with how natural the interaction felt. "Yes, but grown-ups say lots of things," she shrugged, with a wisdom beyond her years. Then, as if suddenly remembering something important, her face lit up. "Want to see what I drew?" Without waiting for an answer, she opened the sketchpad to reveal a colorful drawing. 2 stick figures, one small, in what looked like a pink dress, and one tall, possibly in a suit. Between them was a brown shape that had to be Button. "It's us," she explained, pointing. "Me, you, and Button." Silas looked at the simple illustration, feeling something tighten in his throat. It was the first time in how long that someone had included him in a picture, in a representation of family, in anything beyond a professional contact list. "It's a great drawing," he managed to say, his voice rougher than intended. "You can keep it," Maisie said, carefully tearing the page out and giving it to him. "I can make another one." Silas took the drawing, folded it gently, and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket as if it was something valuable. "I brought something for you, too," he said, handing her the paper bag. Maisie's eyes widened as she pulled out the new teddy bear. It was a bit smaller than Button, with light brown fur and a red bow around its neck. "He's so cute," she exclaimed, cradling the toy. Then she brought it close to Button, as if introducing them. "Look, Button, you have a new friend." "What's his name, Mr. Silas?" "I don't know. I think you should choose." Maisie frowned, thinking hard. "I think his name is Pocket, because he's small enough to fit in a pocket," she decided. Then, as if that solved everything, she smiled again. "Thank you." As they walked around the yard, Silas tried a careful approach. "Maisie, did you draw anything about your mom?" The girl's face brightened. "Yes, do you want to see?" She flipped through the sketchpad until she found a colorful drawing of a dark-haired woman holding what looked like a broom. "That's my mom cleaning. She cleans the hotel where she works. She says one day she'll be a manager, when I'm older." Silas felt a surge of hope. A concrete piece of information. "What's your mom's name?" "April," Maisie replied without hesitation. "Like the month. She was born in April, and Grandma thought it was pretty." "April," he repeated, locking the name into memory. "That's a lovely name." The next days became a routine Silas never planned but found himself unable to break. Late afternoon visits to the shelter, always with the same excuse. "I was just in the neighborhood." Sometimes they simply sat in the yard, Maisie drawing while Silas answered emails on his phone. Other times, he read her stories from the small library in the shelter, tales of adventures in faraway lands, talking animals and unlikely heroes. During one of these reading sessions, Maisie suddenly interrupted him. "Do you think my mom will find me here?" The question caught Silas off guard. There was a note of anxiety in her voice that hadn't been there before. "I'm sure she will," he answered, choosing his words carefully. "But maybe we can help her find you. Do you know where she works?" "The name of the hotel." Maisie bit her lower lip, thinking. "There's a big golden crown in front. It's fancy." "Hotel Grandview," Silas guessed. "Yes." Her eyes lit up. "Do you know it?" "Yes, I do," he replied, feeling that at last he had something tangible to go on. "It's a very nice hotel." Occasionally, when Rosa wasn't looking, he brought chocolates or small surprises. Nothing extravagant. Silas knew the dangers of spoiling a child with expensive gifts, but enough to see that smile return. There were also silences, times when neither spoke, content to share the same space without filling it with words. During these moments, Silas felt something thawing inside him, something that had been hardened by years of self-imposed solitude, and there were laughs. The first time Silas made Maisie laugh, an awkward attempt at doing character voices from a storybook. The sound caught him by surprise. It was so pure, free of any reservation or pretense. He realized he hadn't heard a laugh like that in years. His own laugh, when it came, was subdued. A slightly rusty sound, like an old door rarely opened. But it came. One afternoon, as he watched Maisie play with Button and Pocket, narrating imaginary conversations between them, Silas made a decision. He would find April. He would find out what had happened to her. Not just for Maisie's sake, though the child alone was reason enough, but because something about this story had reached a part of him he'd thought long dead. That evening, after leaving the shelter, Silas didn't drive straight home. Instead, he stopped at a quiet downtown cafe and made a phone call. "I need your services," he said as soon as the call was answered. "I need to find someone. A woman named April works as a housekeeper at the Hotel Grandview." While setting up a meeting with the investigator for the following morning, Silas glanced at Maisie's drawing, now carefully stored in his briefcase. The little girl had smiled at him that afternoon, and for reasons he still didn't fully understand, that smile had changed everything. Martin Shaw's office occupied the third floor of an unremarkable commercial building in the heart of the city. It was a deliberately discreet place, with a modest sign on the door that read, "Shaw and Associates, Investigations." The kind of place people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it. Silas arrived 10 minutes early, deliberately. He preferred waiting to being waited on, a habit cultivated over years of building his restaurant empire. He noted the worn hallway, the walls begging for a fresh coat of paint, the dim lighting. It bothered him, but also reassured him. An investigator with a luxurious office was one who charged too much or talked too much. When the door finally opened, Silas stepped into a surprisingly organized room, albeit as drab as the hallway. Martin Shaw shook his hand firmly. A man in his 50s, hair cropped close and eyes that seemed to record every detail. "Mr. Russell, this is a surprise," Shaw said, indicating the single visitor's chair. "When your secretary called, I assumed it was about some employee issue at one of your restaurants." Silas pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket, discreetly wiping the chair before sitting. The place was far from the standards of cleanliness he demanded in his establishments, but Shaw's reputation for discretion, efficiency, and, most importantly, ethics was why Silas had sought him out. "It's something more personal," Silas said, shifting uncomfortably in the chair. He wasn't used to discussing private matters, let alone with someone he only knew by reputation. "I need to find a person." Shaw raised an eyebrow slightly. "Someone who owes you money." "No, a woman named April who works as a housekeeper at the Hotel Grandview. She—" Silas hesitated, considering how to explain without sounding entirely out of character. "She has a 5-year-old daughter. The girl was found alone, waiting for her mother outside one of my restaurants for several days." Shaw's eyes flickered with interest. "Is this the girl mentioned in the papers last week? The one taken to a shelter?" Silas nodded, slightly annoyed that the case had received even minor media attention. He'd been careful to keep his name out of it. "And what's your involvement?" Shaw asked. No judgment in his tone, just professional curiosity. "The child is fine, physically at least, but she insists her mother will come back. That she always keeps her promises." Silas paused. "I want to find out what happened to this woman. If she really abandoned her child or if something else happened." Shaw studied him for a moment, as if assessing whether that was the whole truth. Then he opened a drawer and took out a small digital recorder. "I'll need all the information you can provide. Full name if possible, description, last known address, places she frequented, friends, anything. All I know is her name's April. She works as a housekeeper at the Hotel Grandview, and the daughter's name is Maisie, age 5. They lived in a yellow apartment near the park. They moved often. There's apparently no father in the picture. That gives me a decent start," Shaw said, jotting notes in a small pad. "Hotel Grandview will be my first stop, HR department, co-workers. I also have this." Silas pulled a folded sheet of paper from his inner jacket pocket. It was one of Maisie's drawings, her attempt at depicting her mother. "Not much, but it gives an idea of what she looks like. Dark hair, probably brown, thin." Shaw examined the child's sketch, nodding slowly. "I'll see what I can find. Normally, I'd take a few days." "Time is crucial," Silas cut in. "The girl's been waiting almost a week now. If something happened to the mother, this could be a matter of life and death." Shaw lifted his eyebrows, somewhat surprised by the urgency in the usually controlled businessman's voice. "I understand. I'll make this a priority. I'll call you as soon as I have something concrete. My daily rate is—" "Money is not an issue," Silas interrupted again. "Just find her. And show for absolute discretion. Always Mr. Russell, always." 3 days passed with no news. 3 days in which Silas tried to maintain his normal routine, but found himself constantly checking his phone, waiting for a call, a message, anything from Shaw. 3 days in which he visited Maisie at the shelter every afternoon, listening to her ask, with unwavering hope, if there was any news of her mother. "Not yet, Maisie," he would say, feeling each word as a small betrayal. "But we're looking." On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Silas was at Lumiere, overseeing a tasting session with his executive chef. They were testing new dishes for the spring menu when his phone vibrated. Seeing Shaw's name on the screen, he slipped away discreetly to answer. "Mr. Russell, I've found something," Shaw said in a steady, professional tone. "Can we meet at my office in an hour?" The tasting ended abruptly, to the disappointment of the chef who had spent the morning preparing samples. Silas barely noticed as he hurried to his car. Shaw's office looked the same, but the investigator's expression had changed. There was a folder on the desk and a laptop open. "First, I found the apartment," Shaw began without preamble, once Silas sat down. A small complex in the east side of town, painted yellow near Memorial Park. The superintendent confirmed that a woman named April Moore lived there with a young daughter. She paid rent in cash, always on time, though sometimes with difficulty. "Moore," Silas repeated, finally getting a last name. "And where is she now?" "Let's go in order." Shaw opened the folder and slid a photocopy towards Silas. It was an employment form. April Moore, 28 years old, worked at the Hotel Grandview for about 8 months as a housekeeper. Her supervisor said she was an exemplary employee, never missed a shift, took overtime, caused no trouble. Silas examined the photocopy. There was a small photo attached to the form, a young woman with brown hair pulled back, light eyes, a serious but kind expression. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but there was a quiet determination in her gaze. "From what I've gathered, she was a devoted mother," Shaw continued. "Dropped her daughter at a community daycare every morning, worked her shift, sometimes did overtime, and always picked the girl up on time. On weekends, neighbors saw them at the park or the public library. Doesn't sound like someone who would abandon a child," Silas commented. "No, it doesn't," Shaw agreed, his tone shifting slightly. "And she didn't." The investigator turned the laptop so Silas could see the screen. It showed video from a traffic camera at an intersection. The timestamp indicated it was 3 days before Maisie was found at the restaurant. "This is from a stoplight camera 2 blocks from Lumiere," Shaw explained. "Watch." In the grainy video, Silas saw a woman crossing the street, holding a small child's hand. Even with the poor resolution, it was clearly April and Maisie. The woman appeared rushed, frequently looking over her shoulder as if she feared someone might be following. Then it happened. A dark car ran the red light at high speed. April seemed to notice the danger at the last second. In one quick move, she pushed Maisie forward onto the sidewalk, only to be violently struck by the vehicle. Silas felt the air leave his lungs. The video continued, showing Maisie tumbling onto the curb, apparently dazed but conscious. April lay motionless in the street. The car that hit her stopped briefly, then accelerated away. Bystanders ran to help April. An ambulance arrived minutes later. Amid the chaos, Maisie appeared to wander off, out of frame. She must have been scared and ran, Shaw theorized, pausing the video. Probably remembered the restaurant her mum had shown her and ended up there, waiting for April to come get her. "What about the mother?" Silas asked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "She was taken to City General Hospital in critical condition. No ID, no one there knew who she was. In all the confusion, no one realized there was a child involved." Shaw slid another document towards Silas, a medical report. "Severe head trauma, internal bleeding, multiple fractures. She's been in a coma since admission. The doctors tried surgery, but her condition was too unstable. Now they're waiting for her to stabilize for another procedure." Silas closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process it all. He replayed the accident in his mind. April's instinctive move to save her daughter, Maisie, frightened and alone, heading to the only safe place she knew, waiting day after day. "She'll come back. She always keeps her promises." "I need to go to the hospital," Silas said, rising to his feet. "I already notified them you'd be coming," Shaw said, shutting his laptop. "They're waiting for confirmation of her identity." Silas nodded, realizing the value of the fee he paid Shaw. The investigator hadn't just found April, he'd paved the way for the next steps. "There's one more thing," Shaw added, his tone turning cautious. "I spoke to some of her co-workers. In the days leading up to the accident, April seemed nervous. One colleague saw her arguing with a man in the employee parking lot. She didn't recognize him, but said April was visibly shaken afterward." "You think it wasn't an accident?" Silas asked, letting the question hang. "I'm not making accusations," Shaw said carefully, "but the car that hit her didn't slow down, despite the red light, and it didn't stop to help. Could be a reckless driver or something else." "Keep digging," Silas ordered, mind racing ahead, planning his next moves. "I want to know everything about April Moore's life, if someone wanted to hurt her, and why." "That goes beyond finding a missing person," Shaw cautioned. "We might be looking at a criminal investigation." "Do whatever it takes," Silas said, already at the door, "and text me the hospital address." City General Hospital was huge and austere, a monument to efficiency rather than comfort. The parking lot was nearly full, and Silas had to circle twice before finding a space. As he walked inside, he felt a sense of apprehension he hadn't anticipated. What would he say once he got there? How would he explain his interest in a woman he technically didn't know? At reception, a weary-looking attendant typed into an ancient computer. She didn't look up when Silas approached. "May I help you?" "I'm looking for a patient." "I believe she was admitted about a week ago. A hit-and-run victim. Her name is April Moore." The receptionist typed the name with disinterested efficiency. "No April Moore registered. She may have been admitted as a Jane Doe, a woman in her late 20s, brown hair." "I'll need more than that," the receptionist interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. "Are you family?" "No, but then I can't help you. Patient information is confidential and only provided to family." Silas took a deep breath, holding back irritation. He wasn't used to this kind of roadblock. In his restaurants and businesses, his name opened doors. "I understand the policy, but this is a special situation. The patient had no identification. She has a 5-year-old daughter currently in a shelter because nobody knows about her. I'm here to fix that." Something in his tone must have conveyed the urgency, because the receptionist's expression softened slightly. "Let me call Dr. Martinez. He's taking care of our unidentified patient in the ICU." 15 minutes later, Silas was walking through sterile corridors with a young doctor who looked tired but sharp-eyed. "We can't be sure it's the same person," Dr. Martinez said as they walked. "But the description fits, as do the date and nature of the accident." "I understand. She's in critical but stable condition," the doctor continued. "Significant head trauma, multiple broken ribs, a punctured lung, fractured pelvis. We did emergency surgery when she arrived, but she'll need another once she stabilizes enough." "When will that be?" The doctor hesitated. "Hard to say. The human body has its own timeline for healing. But if she is who you believe, confirming her identity would be a big step. We could access her medical history, contact family." "Her only family is her daughter," Silas interrupted. "As I mentioned, she's in a shelter." They reached double doors marked intensive care unit. The doctor paused before pushing them open. "You seem very invested for someone who's not related." Silas felt the weight of the question. Why was he doing this? Why did he care so much? Was it guilt? A sense of responsibility because the child had been found at his restaurant? Or something more related to deeply buried memories of his own childhood? "Her daughter truly believes, with all her heart, that her mom will come back," he finally said. "I don't want her spending her life waiting, like I did." The doctor nodded, refraining from further questions, and pushed the doors open. The ICU was a world of its own, with its own rhythms and sounds. The constant beep of monitors, the hum of ventilators, the quiet footsteps of nurses. Dr. Martinez led him to one of the beds, separated from the others by thin curtains. "Is that her?" Silas looked for the first time at the woman who, without knowing it, had changed his life in the past days. April Moore looked far more fragile than in her photo. The color in her face was drained, bruises and swelling were partially visible, tubes and wires coming out from places he didn't want to examine too closely. A machine breathed for her. Part of her hair had been shaved for surgery, and bandages wrapped her head. But it was her. The same woman from the video. The same one in Maisie's childlike drawing, though without the smile her daughter had drawn. "Yes," he confirmed. "That's April Moore." Silas felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, because now he knew the truth, pain, because the truth was almost as cruel as abandonment, and a sort of reluctant admiration for a woman who, in her final conscious moment, chose to save her child. "She didn't abandon the girl," he said quietly, more to himself than to the doctor. "She tried to come back." Dr. Martinez watched the heart monitor for a moment. "Now that we have an ID, we'll need someone to sign off on her next procedures. As I mentioned, she'll need another surgery, possibly several." Silas nodded absently, his eyes still on April's unconscious form. "I'll sign. My lawyers will handle the necessary paperwork." "Mr. Russell, I'm not sure if you understand the gravity." "I understand perfectly," Silas interrupted, finally meeting the doctor's eyes. "I want her to have the best possible treatment, specialists if necessary, the best equipment, whatever it takes." There was a moment of silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. "Why?" the doctor asked, genuinely curious. Silas looked again at April, so fragile as she fought to survive. He thought of Maisie, so certain her mother would return. "She needs to keep a promise," he answered simply. Through the ICU window, the sky was darkening, the end of another day. Silas knew he had to call Shaw to tell him to keep investigating. He had to call his lawyers to start the legal process of assuming responsibility for April's care. He needed to update Rosa at the shelter. But for a moment, he just stood there, gazing at the unconscious woman, feeling a weight and responsibility he had never expected to bear. "She'll come back, Maisie," he murmured, so quietly that even the doctor next to him didn't hear. "We'll do everything we can to bring her back." On the drive to the shelter, Silas mentally rehearsed what he would say. How to explain to a 5-year-old that her mother was in a hospital, between life and death. How to be honest without crushing her. He had no experience with children, much less in such delicate matters. Many phrases formed and were discarded as he drove. "Your mom is sick." Too vague. "Your mom had an accident." Too blunt. "She's sleeping in the hospital." Too childish. When he arrived at Sunshine Temporary Shelter, Rosa greeted him with the same warmth as always, but there was a questioning look in her eyes. "Mr. Russell, we weren't expecting you until later. Did something happen?" "Yes, I need to talk to Maisie. It's important." Rosa nodded slowly. "Any news about her mother?" "I found her. She's in the hospital. There was an accident." The social worker let out a small sigh. "I see. Would you like me to be there when you tell her? We have protocols for situations like this. Sometimes it's better if a professional—" "No," Silas interrupted, then softened his tone. "I appreciate it, but I think it's better if I do it. She trusts me." "As you wish." Rosa didn't look entirely convinced, but she didn't push the matter. "She's in the playroom with the other kids. I'll take you there." The playroom was a bright, cheerful space with shelves of toys, small tables, and children's drawings on the walls. Around 8 kids were there, supervised by 2 staff members. Some played in groups, others alone. Maisie was in a corner, working on a simple jigsaw puzzle, with button and pocket positioned as if they were overseeing the task. She looked up when Silas entered, her face lighting up instantly. "Mr. Silas, you're early today." She ran to him, hugging his legs, a display of affection that still surprised him. Over the past few days, he'd gotten used to this greeting, yet he remained slightly awkward, though secretly pleased. "Hello, Maisie," he smiled, trying to keep his voice light. "I was wondering if we could talk for a bit, just the 2 of us." The girl nodded without hesitation, absolute trust with no reservations. It was both touching and terrifying, how easily she put her faith in him. Rosa led them to a small visitation room. It had cozy sofas, a small coffee table, and discreetly placed toys in one corner. "I'll be nearby if you need anything," she said before leaving, quietly closing the door. Maisie sat on the couch, legs dangling above the floor. Her watchful eyes followed Silas, who suddenly seemed unsure what to do with himself. "Did you bring another teddy bear?" she asked, glancing around for a bag or package. "Not today," Silas replied, finally sitting beside her, close but not too close. "I have something to tell you, Maisie, something about your mom." The girl's entire body seemed to tense. Her eyes grew wide and fixed on Silas. "Did you find my mom?" The hope in her voice was almost palpable. "Yes," Silas said, feeling the weight of responsibility in each word to come. "I found your mom, Maisie, but she's in a hospital." "Hospital?" Maisie repeated, testing the word. "Is she sick?" Silas took a deep breath. "She had an accident, Maisie. A car hit her when you two were crossing the street. Do you remember that?" The girl frowned, as if trying to grasp a distant memory. "I remember noise and falling, and my mom yelling my name." "That's right," Silas gently confirmed. "When the car came, your mom pushed you away to save you. She was very brave." Maisie nodded slowly, absorbing each detail. "And then you got scared and ran. You went to the restaurant because it was a place you knew, and you waited for your mom there. What about her?" "She was taken to the hospital that same day, Maisie. She's been there ever since. She's asleep. The doctors are taking care of her." A long silence followed. Silas could almost see the gears turning in her mind, reconciling this new information with her unwavering belief that her mum would come back. "Will she wake up?" she finally asked in a small voice. Silas felt a knot in his throat. The million-dollar question. "The doctors are doing everything they can to help her wake up," he answered carefully. "And I've made sure she has the best medical team." Maisie looked at her hands, then back at Silas. There was a question in her eyes, one she seemed almost afraid to voice. "She didn't leave me," Maisie whispered at last. The question hit Silas like a physical blow. All the pain and insecurity of a child who feared she'd been abandoned, condensed into 4 words. "Never," he said, with a conviction that came from deep within him. "Your mom would never leave you, Maisie. She was trying to come back when the accident happened." It was like a dam bursting. Maisie's face crumpled, and for the first time since Silas had met her, she cried. Not the restrained crying of a child trying to be strong, but a devastated sobbing of someone finally allowing themselves to feel the pain they've carried. Silas didn't think, he just acted on instinct, which was rare for him. He pulled Maisie close, wrapping his arms around her in an awkward but genuine hug. She buried her face in his chest, her small hands clutching his shirt as if it were an anchor in a storm. "It's okay, Maisie," he murmured, gently rocking her. "It's okay to cry." He didn't say it would all be fine. He couldn't promise that. He didn't know if April Moore would live, if she'd fully recover, if she'd still be the mother Maisie remembered. But he could promise that the girl wouldn't face it alone. When the sobs finally subsided, Maisie pulled back slightly, noticing Silas's shirt now stained with her tears and a little bit of mucus. "Sorry," she said, pointing to the stain. "Don't worry about that," Silas replied, taking a handkerchief from his pocket to gently wipe her face. "How do you feel?" Maisie thought for a moment. "Sad, but also happy, because Mom didn't leave me. She just can't come right now." "Exactly," Silas said, impressed by the wisdom in her 5 years. "Maisie, I have a question for you. It's important, so think about it carefully before you answer, okay?" She nodded, suddenly serious. "Would you like to come live with me until your mom gets better? Just for a while, like a vacation. We can visit your mom in the hospital every day." Her eyes went wide. "I can." "If you want," Silas said, realizing he was surprisingly nervous about her answer. "I have a spare room that could be yours, and Button and Pocket can come too. Of course. They're family." Maisie pondered the offer with all the seriousness she could muster. "Can I bring my drawings?" "All of them?" "And my colored pencils?" "Absolutely." A small smile began to form on her tear-streaked face. "Then I want to." Silas felt a sense of relief he hadn't expected. He'd made the decision at the hospital, looking at April Moore through the ICU window. He couldn't do much for her other than pay for the best care, but he could ensure her daughter was safe, looked after, and most important, not alone. "I'll talk to Rosa about it," he said. "There are rules, paperwork to sign, but we'll figure it out." "Are you a lawyer too?" Maisie asked, curious. Silas smiled. "No, but I know some." The process for gaining temporary custody of Maisie wasn't as complicated as Silas had feared. His status as a respected citizen and successful businessman, and, not least, the man who had located the missing mother, worked in his favor. There were forms, background checks, a surprise visit from a social worker to his apartment to ensure it was suitable for a child. But 3 days later, all the authorizations were in place. During those days, Silas had embarked on a frantic mission to transform. The guest room, once as impersonal as the rest of his apartment, was repainted a soft yellow. A new, smaller bed arrived, more suitable for a child. Shelves were installed, children's books purchased, as well as toys carefully selected by a store clerk who seemed touched by the story of an uncle trying to create a welcoming space for a niece temporarily in his care. Silas didn't correct that assumption. It was simpler that way. On the day he finally took Maisie home, he was more nervous than he'd ever been opening a new restaurant. What if she didn't like the room? What if she missed the shelter and the other kids? What if he had no idea how to care for her properly? But when he opened the door and saw Maisie's eyes widen with surprise and delight, he knew he'd done something right. "Is this all for me?" she asked in a near whisper. "All yours," Silas confirmed. Maisie walked in slowly, touching each object as though afraid it might disappear. The bed with a star-patterned comforter, the shelf of colorful books, a little desk with art supplies neatly organized in jars. "Look, button, look, pocket." "Our new house," she exclaimed, showing each detail to the teddy bears. Silas stood at the doorway, watching. There was something profoundly satisfying about seeing the space come alive through her eyes. His apartment, which had always been just a place to sleep and occasionally work, was finally becoming a home. The first few days were a mutual adjustment. Silas, accustomed to a solitary routine, now had to accommodate a child's needs. Maisie, in turn, cautiously tested the boundaries of her new environment, as if afraid any misstep would make her lose everything. Gradually, a new routine emerged. Breakfast together, something Silas usually skipped or ate standing up. Now there were cereals, toast with jam, chocolate milk, conversations about last night's dreams or the day's plans. Maisie went to a nearby school, while Silas rearranged his work schedule so he could pick her up in the afternoon. Then they visited April at the hospital. Maisie brought new drawings every day, placing them carefully beside her mother's bed, explaining each one in detail, as if April could hear her every word. Maybe she could. Doctors said it was possible. Evenings involved simple dinners, prepared by Silas, who discovered he actually enjoyed cooking when it wasn't a professional obligation, then old movies he loved. And, to his surprise, Maisie enjoyed, too. The Wizard of Oz, Mary Poppins, classics that spoke of magical worlds and happy endings. Weekends were spent exploring the city, the zoo, the park, the aquarium, places Silas rarely visited, but which gained new meaning through Maisie's excited gaze. And there were conversations, small questions arising at unexpected times. Why does the moon change shape? Do fish sleep? Who invented ice cream? Silas found himself researching answers, eager to feed the child's boundless curiosity. At night, after reading her a bedtime story, a ritual that quickly became sacred, Silas often sat alone in the living room, quietly marveling at how drastically his life had changed. The apartment, once spotless, now bore evidence of Maisie everywhere. A pencil left on the couch, a drawing taped to the fridge, a tiny shoe left in the hallway. Each item out of place, each small fingerprint on formerly pristine surfaces, reminded him that his once cold, impersonal home was gradually transforming, warming up, becoming a real home. And if Silas himself was also changing, softening, becoming something more than just the owner of a successful restaurant chain, well, That was something he wasn't quite ready to analyze fully. What mattered was the decision he'd made that day at the shelter, when Maisie had cried in his arms for the first time. No matter what happened to April Moore, whether she fully recovered or not, Silas would never let that child be alone again. Not if he could prevent it. Silas stood by the ICU window as the medical team examined April. Dr. Lambert, the neurosurgeon he'd hired, pointed to the monitor, explaining something to the staff. Her face was serious but not pessimistic. It had been 3 weeks since April was identified. 3 weeks of a new life split between caring for Maisie and monitoring April's recovery, a life Silas never imagined for himself, but had thrown himself into with surprising determination. "Mr. Russell," Dr. Lambert said as she exited the room, snapping Silas out of his thoughts, "we have good news. The tests show her intracranial pressure is finally normal. We believe we can proceed with the second surgery tomorrow." Silas nodded, feeling that mix of relief and apprehension he'd grown accustomed to. "What are her chances?" "They've improved considerably. I can't promise results, but we're optimistic." "Do whatever it takes," he replied, already picking up a pen to sign the authorization she offered. This had become a ritual. Forms, signatures, medical decisions. Silas had legally taken responsibility for April's care with discreet efficiency, hiring the best specialists, approving procedures, arranging transfers, all without fanfare, as if just fulfilling a duty. Yet it wasn't simply obligation, though he still couldn't fully name what it was. After the doctor left, Silas entered the room. It felt odd to be there without Maisie, who usually accompanied him on these visits. Today, however, she was at school on a field trip to the Science Museum. Silas had seized the opportunity to discuss the details of the surgery without the child present. April's room looked different than when she'd arrived. The walls, once bare, now displayed dozens of colorful drawings by Maisie, a small collection of teddy bears, each with its own name and personality, according to Maisie, lined a shelf. There were new photographs too, taken by Silas. Maisie at the park, Maisie blowing out birthday candles, Maisie grinning next to her new friend from school. It was as if, even in her unconscious state, April could follow her daughter's life through those images. Silas approached the bed. April looked less fragile now. Some color had returned to her face. Many bruises had faded. Her hair, once partially shaved for surgery, was beginning to grow back. Nurses kept it brushed, her skin moisturized, her nails trimmed, small dignities preserved. "Good morning, April," he said, taking a seat by the bed. He spoke to her every day, though it felt odd. The doctor said coma patients sometimes could hear, and Maisie took that very seriously. It had become natural for Silas, too. "Maisie's on a field trip today, at the Science Museum. She was really excited, especially about the dinosaur exhibit." He paused, listening to the quiet beeping of the monitors and the gentle rise and fall of April's chest, aided by a ventilator. "Your surgery is tomorrow. Dr. Lambert is confident. She's a good doctor, the best in the area." Another pause. It was easier to talk when Maisie was around, guiding the conversation with her constant stories and questions. "Your apartment. We've kept everything. Your stuff, Maisie's, for when you come back." It was true. One of the first things Silas did was ensure April's apartment was secured. He paid overdue rent, struck a deal with the landlord to keep it reserved for a few months. Then, with Rosa's help, he boxed up their belongings. It had been a strangely intimate experience, entering that small apartment and seeing the evidence of the life April and Maisie had built. The children's books on a tiny shelf, the single decent coat April owned, carefully stored in dry cleaning plastic. Photographs, rare, precious, showing happy moments. April holding an infant that could only be Maisie, the two at a fair, Maisie blowing out candles on a homemade cake. A simple life but full of love. It was evident in each detail, every choice. The little money April had went mostly for Maisie's needs, books, school supplies, decent clothes. For herself, just the essentials. Investigator Shaw kept digging into the accident, though with little progress. The car that hit April was never found. One witness recalled part of the license plate, but not enough. The police had filed it away as a hit and run, not seeming too eager to solve it. But Silas hadn't given up. Something still didn't add up about April's anxiety in those final days, her co-worker's account of seeing her argue with an unknown man. For now, though, the priority was her recovery. Everything else could wait. Silas. Rosa's voice at the door brought him back to the present. Sorry to interrupt. The school called. Maisie's field trip ended early, and she's waiting to be picked up. I'm on my way, he said, standing up. Before leaving, he rearranged the fresh flowers he'd brought the day before, an almost insignificant gesture, but it felt important to keep the room pleasant, as if it might somehow help her heal faster. At the door, he turned back one last time. We'll be back tomorrow, April. Maisie wants to tell you all about the dinosaurs. The drive to the school was short. As he navigated the streets, Silas mentally organized his schedule. He'd have to shuffle some meetings to be at the hospital during April's surgery. He needed to call the accountant about medical expenses. And Maisie's friend's birthday party was this weekend. They needed to buy a present. Life was complicated now, divided between responsibilities he never dreamed of taking on. Strangely enough, it felt fuller than ever. Maisie was waiting at the school entrance, chatting happily with a boy her age. When she spotted Silas, her face lit up and she ran toward him. Mr. Silas, I saw a giant T-Rex skeleton and I touched a real meteorite. He smiled, soaking up her enthusiasm. Tell me all about it on the way. We'll swing by the hospital to see your mum before we go home. As Maisie got into the back seat, chattering about asteroids and mass extinctions, Silas thought about the surgery scheduled for the next day, the decisions he would have to make, and the uncertain future they all faced. 2 lives had been placed in his care, one bright and full of possibility, the other suspended between darkness and hope. Quietly, without fanfare, as though fulfilling a duty he never imagined would be his, he continued to care for both. Late in the afternoon, Silas's phone rang. He was driving back from a meeting at Lumiere with Maisie in the back seat, humming distractedly while drawing in her notebook. Dr. Lambert's name lit up on the screen, making his heart skip a beat. She only called when it was important. Hello? Mr. Russell. The doctor sounded calm, but there was an unusual note in her voice. I think you should come to the hospital as soon as possible. Did something happen? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady so Maisie wouldn't worry. April Moore woke up. Silas almost lost control of the car. 5 weeks. April had been in a coma for 5 weeks since the major surgery, since the accident. How is she? She regained consciousness about 20 minutes ago. She's still very weak and confused, as expected, but she's lucid, responsive to stimuli, recognizes where she is. We're on our way, Silas said, hanging up. In the rearview mirror, he saw Maisie lift her eyes from her drawing, curiosity in her gaze. Who was that, Mr. Silas? He hesitated. He didn't want to raise false hopes, but he couldn't hide news this big. That was Dr. Lambert at the hospital. Your mum. She woke up. Maisie. The girl's eyes grew huge, shining like never before. Mum woke up. Is she okay? Did she ask about me? She just woke up. She's still recovering, Silas explained, turning the car toward the hospital. But yes, she's okay. I'm sure she asked about you. Maisie fell silent for a moment, processing the news. Then a grin spread across her face, so wide Silas felt a pressure in his chest. I knew it, she said simply. I knew she'd come back. When they arrived at the hospital, Dr. Lambert was waiting at the ICU entrance. Her normally serious expression held a small, hopeful smile. She's stable and conscious, the doctor said. Still very weak, and we have to monitor her closely, but the initial signs are promising. Does she remember what happened? Silas asked, partially. It's normal to have memory gaps around the traumatic event. Right now, she's most concerned about her daughter. Maisie clutched Silas's hand tightly, nearly bouncing with impatience. Can I see my mom? Please, can I see my mom right now? Dr. Lambert exchanged a glance with Silas before crouching to Maisie's level. Let's do this, Maisie. First, Mr. Silas will go in and talk to your mum for a bit, explain everything that's happened. Then you can come in, okay? Maisie seemed to weigh this suggestion. Can I make her a drawing while I wait?" "Of course," Dr. Lambert smiled. "I'm sure she'd love that." While a nurse took Maisie to a small waiting room stocked with colouring supplies, Dr. Lambert turned back to Silas. "I thought it best to prepare her first. She knows she was in an accident, but we haven't told her yet about how long she's been here or her daughter's situation. We didn't want to overwhelm her." Silas nodded, feeling unexpectedly nervous. He'd spent weeks visiting April, sitting by her bed, talking to her without knowing if she heard a word. Now that she was awake, it felt like meeting a stranger. "Mr. Russell," the doctor said gently, "just be kind, go slowly. She's still processing a lot." The room was quiet except for the gentle sounds of the monitors. April was upright in bed, partially supported by pillows. She looked more fragile awake than unconscious, as if the effort of being present was taxing her weakened body. Her eyes, which Silas had only seen closed, were open now. They were light blue, alert despite her obvious fatigue. When he entered, she slowly turned her head toward him. For a moment, neither spoke. There was something intensely intimate about meeting at last, after everything that had happened. "Hello, April," Silas finally said, his voice softer than he intended. "My name is Silas Russell." She studied him for a moment before speaking, her voice rough from disuse. You're the one who's been taking care of Maisie?" "Yes," he confirmed, stepping closer. "May I sit?" She nodded, and he took the chair by the bed. "How's my daughter?" April asked, worry etched on her pale features. "They said she's fine, but—" "She's doing great," Silas assured her. "She's actually here in the hospital now, making a drawing for you." April's eyes filled with tears. "How long has it been?" 5 weeks since the accident." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. "I remember the street, the car coming, pushing Maisie." Her voice broke. "Then nothing. You were hit by the car," Silas explained gently. "Taken here with no ID. Maisie managed to get to my restaurant, Lumiere, a couple blocks from where it happened. She waited there for 3 days." April covered her mouth with her hand, tears now flowing freely. 3 days. My child was alone for 3 days. She's incredibly strong," Silas said, feeling a need to comfort her. "And she never, for a moment, doubted you'd come back. She always keeps her promises," she told everyone. That seemed to break something inside April. Her shoulders trembled in silent sobs. "I need to see her, please." "In just a minute," Silas promised. "First, I think you should know what happened after we found her." Over the next few minutes, Silas explained how he'd taken Maisie to the shelter, hired an investigator to find April, eventually obtained temporary custody of the girl. He described the surgeries, the specialists, the arrangements he had made. April listened intently, her initial caution giving way to deep, confused gratitude. "Why?" she asked when he finished. "Why did you do all this for us? You didn't even know me." It was a question Silas still couldn't fully answer for himself. "I met Maisie," he said simply, "and she reminded me of something I'd forgotten." Before April could ask what that was, a nurse entered with a sheet of paper. "Sorry to interrupt, but someone out here is very excited to show you her drawing." She handed the paper to April, who held it in trembling hands. The drawing was bright and happy. 3 stick figures, one small in pink, one medium with long hair, and one tall in a suit. In the bottom corner was Maisie's wobbly signature. She drew. "The 3 of us," April murmured, touching the paper as if it were a treasure. "She draws a lot," Silas said with a small smile. "We covered all your hospital room walls with her drawings for when you woke up." April raised her eyes, new determination in her gaze. "I want to see my daughter now. Please, I'll go get her." Then was when Silas stepped into the corridor. He found Maisie on the chair closest to the door, nearly vibrating with impatience. "Did she like my drawing? Can I go in now?" "She loved it. And yes, you can go in, but remember she's still weak, so—" He didn't get to finish. Maisie had already dashed past him, into the room. Silas followed, stopping at the door to witness the reunion. "Mom!" Maisie exclaimed, running to the bed. "My love!" April's voice was thick with emotion. Maisie paused just short of the bed, suddenly cautious when she saw all the tubes and monitors. "Can I hug you?" "Of course you can," April replied, opening her arms. Just be careful with the wires, okay? The girl approached with surprising gentleness, climbing onto the bed as if returning to the very place she belonged. The two hugged each other tightly, as though time hadn't passed, as though 5 weeks were just a moment. "I missed you so much, honey," April whispered, kissing Maisie's head. "I'm so sorry I left you alone. I'm so sorry." "I knew you'd come back," Maisie replied with that childlike simplicity for whom doubt was never an option. "You always do." "You promised." April looked up, meeting Silas's gaze over her daughter's head. There was so much emotion in that look that he almost had to glance away, feeling like an intruder on such an intimate moment. "You took care of her," April said, not as a question but a statement filled with gratitude. "It was my pleasure," he answered honestly. "She's an incredible kid." "Mr. Silas was really nice, Mom," Maisie chimed in, still hugging her mother. "He took me to the park and the zoo, and he let me have ice cream on Sunday." April smiled, the first real smile Silas had seen on her face. It transformed her features, lighting them up despite the pallor and exhaustion. "Sounds like you had a lot of fun." "Yes, but I missed you every day." "We came to visit you every day too. Mr. Silas said you might be able to hear us, so I told you everything. Do you remember?" "Not exactly, sweetheart, but maybe somewhere in here." She touched her chest. "I heard you." Maisie continued talking, a torrent of words attempting to summarize 5 weeks in 5 minutes. April listened intently, as if each word were a treasure. Occasionally, her eyes met Silas's, expressing gratitude beyond words. When Maisie finally paused for breath, April turned fully to Silas. "I know you," she said softly. Silas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You do? You probably don't remember. Why would you?" A small smile touched her lips. "I used to work nights cleaning the administrative offices of your restaurant chain, 3 nights a week, after my shift at the hotel." Silas searched his memory, but couldn't recall. "I'm sorry, It's all right," April reassured him. "We were invisible, those of us who cleaned. We did our jobs after everyone left. But one night, you were working late. We met in the elevator. I was coming in, you were going out." She paused, as if that memory held particular importance. "You said good evening and smiled, not the automatic smile people do without thinking, but a genuine one, like you really saw me. It was the first time I felt seen in that place." Silas fell silent, realizing this moment had been so insignificant to him that he hadn't even stored it in memory, yet for her it had been important enough to remember even after a 5-week coma. "The next day, I showed Maisie your restaurant, the Lumiere, as we passed by," April went on. "I told her it was a special place, run by a man who actually notices people. Mom said one day we'd eat there," Maisie added, "when she won the lottery." April let out a faint laugh, stroking her daughter's hair. "That's true. It was our silly little dream." Silas felt something strange in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. The idea that their paths had crossed before, so subtly, so insignificantly, yet somehow planted the seed for everything that followed. As if fate, or whatever force shaped the universe, had charted this course long before any of them realized. "It's not silly," he finally said. "And when you get out of here, that dream will come true. Best table in the house, anything you want from the menu." April smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "You've already done more than we could ever ask for, Mr. Russell." "Silas," he corrected. "Please, call me Silas." A brief silence followed, heavy with unspoken words, something still forming, still uncertain. "Silas," she repeated softly, testing the name. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter. Thank you for taking care of both of us." He could have said it was nothing, that anyone would have done the same, but that wasn't true, and somehow, in that moment of raw honesty, polite lies felt out of place. "It was an honor," he said simply. As he watched mother and daughter together again, Silas understood that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning that might have been written long before any of them realized, back when a tired man offered a genuine smile to a woman nobody else noticed. The day April was discharged arrived on a spring morning. Nearly 3 months had passed since the accident, and 8 weeks since she woke from the coma. They were weeks of intensive physical therapy, consultations with specialists, and a slow yet steady recovery. The initially grim prognosis had given way to something the doctors called almost miraculous, though a long road remained. Silas parked in front of the hospital at exactly 10 in the morning, as agreed. Maisie sat beside him in the passenger seat, swinging her legs impatiently, clutching a bouquet of yellow daisies, her mother's favorite. "Will she like our new place?" Maisie asked, for the 5th time that morning. "I'm sure she will," Silas replied patiently. "It's a nice place, near a park just like you both wanted." The new place was actually a comfortable apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Silas had rented it specifically for April and Maisie, decorating it with care and attention to detail, a place to start over without the memories of the old apartment, but with enough familiar elements to feel like home. Neither he nor April had explicitly discussed the arrangement. It had happened organically, like many things between them in recent months. One afternoon, while they talked in her hospital room, April voiced her worries about where they'd go when she was discharged. "I can't go back to the old place," she said. "Too many memories." "And I don't want Maisie." "Leave that to me," Silas answered, and the matter was settled. It was like that for many things. Medical bills, Maisie's schooling, the therapy April still needed for months. Silas simply took on the responsibilities, not as a burden or duty, but as a quiet, deliberate choice. "Look, Mom's waiting," Maisie's excited voice snapped him back. April was by the hospital entrance, seated in a wheelchair as per protocol, though she could walk with a cane. Her hair, grown longer since the accident, was tied in a simple ponytail. She wore new clothes, a gift from Silas, though she insisted on choosing each piece online herself. Maisie leaped out of the car as soon as Silas parked, running to hug her mother. Silas hung back a few steps, letting them have their moment. More and more, he found himself both part of their lives and a respectful observer of a bond that existed long before he arrived. "I brought your favorite flowers," Maisie said, offering the bouquet. "They're beautiful, sweetheart," April replied, hugging her again before lifting her eyes to Silas. "Good morning." "Good morning," he said, finally stepping closer. "Ready to see your new home?" April nodded, her expression a mix of gratitude and something more complex that Silas still couldn't name. More than ready. The new apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building with an elevator, essential for April's current condition. It had 2 roomy bedrooms, a bright living room with windows overlooking a neighborhood park, and a practical kitchen. Silas opened the door and stepped aside, letting April enter first with her cane. Maisie dashed ahead, eager to show her mom every detail of the new place she already knew well, having helped decorate. "Look, Mom, your room has a big window, and mine has a yellow wall like I always wanted, and there's a desk for my homework and room for all my books." April moved slowly through the apartment, taking it all in. The shelves with Maisie's favorite books, the 3 chairs around the dining table, the well-equipped kitchen, the vase of fresh daisies on the counter. But it was the smaller touches that really struck her, the photos of her and Maisie, rescued from the old apartment, now framed on the wall, the patchwork quilt her grandmother had made, carefully cleaned and draped over the sofa, the one-eyed teddy bear Button, resting on Maisie's bed alongside his new friend Pocket. It was a perfect balance of new and familiar, of fresh starts and continuity. "It's perfect," she said at last, turning to Silas. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied simply. It was an answer he gave often now, and both knew it went beyond politeness. The relationship they'd built, whatever label it might someday have, existed in a space beyond debts and gratitude. That afternoon, the 3 of them ate lunch together at the new dining table, just a simple meal delivered from one of Silas's restaurants. They talked about upcoming plans, April's physical therapy, Maisie's school presentation the following week, the new book Silas had bought to read to her. It was an ordinary domestic scene, the kind that happens in countless homes every day. But for these 3, it represented something extraordinary, normalcy regained after chaos. When Silas finally prepared to leave, there was a slight awkwardness at the door. "You 2 will be okay," he asked. "I can come back later if you need anything." "We'll be fine," April assured him with a gentle smile. "But you're coming for dinner tomorrow, right? Maisie is counting on it." "I wouldn't miss it," he promised, and so began the new routine. Silas didn't live with them, but he was there almost daily. Frequent dinners, weekend outings, medical appointments, school meetings. Gradually, naturally, he became a constant in their lives, as they did in his. Weeks turned into months. April continued to improve in her recovery, transitioning from a cane to short walks without assistance. She found part-time work as an administrative assistant in a medical clinic, ironically, thanks to one of the doctors who had treated her. The first few days were tough. April came home exhausted, her body still not fully recovered. Silas noticed the dark circles under her eyes, but also the satisfaction she felt each time she completed a day at work. "It's hard, but it's good," she said one evening while the three of them had dinner. Another new skill Silas had discovered he enjoyed more than expected. "I feel useful again." "You've always been useful," Maisie objected with the clear logic of a child. "You're my mum," April laughed, exchanging a glance with Silas that spoke volumes. "True, sweetheart, but adults need something for themselves too, something that makes them feel like they're contributing." "Like Mr. Silas's restaurants?" Maisie asked. "Exactly like Mr. Silas's restaurants," April agreed. "But you don't spend as much time at work now," Maisie said, looking at Silas. "Before you only came to see us at the hospital and at night. Now you're here all the time." Silas nearly choked on his wine. It was true. Since the accident, since Maisie, since April, he had drastically cut back his work hours, delegating more, prioritizing differently. "I realized some things are more important," he said simply. April reached across the table, lightly touching his hand, a brief gesture, but heavy with meaning. Maisie noticed, with that sharp awareness she sometimes showed, making her seem older than her 6 years. But to the adult's relief, she simply smiled and returned to her mashed potatoes. The evening ended as so many did. Silas reading a bedtime story to Maisie while April took her nightly shower. Then a cup of tea in the living room before he said goodbye. Routine, comfort, normalcy. On nights he wasn't with them, Silas found himself pacing around his penthouse, restless. The large, impersonal space felt emptier than ever. He started making small changes, adding color, plants, photos. One photo in particular, taken one Sunday at the park with the three of them smiling at the camera, occupied a prominent spot on his coffee table. They weren't a traditional family. There had been no discussions about the future, formal commitments, or permanent moves, just a tacit understanding that for now they were happy this way, day by day, building something solid and comforting. Maisie got an A in math, April announced on a Friday afternoon, about 6 months after her hospital discharge. Silas, who was chopping onions for dinner, a new routine he'd found surprisingly enjoyable, looked up. "That's wonderful. Where is she?" "In her room, finishing a drawing. I think it's a present for you," April said with a playful smile, leaning against the kitchen counter. She no longer used a cane inside the house, though she still took it for longer walks. "Well, we need to celebrate," Silas decided. "How about some ice cream after dinner?" "You'll spoil her," April teased, but her smile showed there was no real scolding behind it. "She deserves to be spoiled sometimes. Both of you do." April fell silent for a moment, watching him. "You know, we've never really talked about this," she said at last. "Talked about what?" "This. Us. What we're doing." Silas paused, setting the knife down. "Do we need to?" April pondered the question. "Maybe not. It's working, isn't it?" "I'd say so," he replied, resuming his chopping. "Unless you see it differently." "No," she said, smiling, and it was a free, easy smile, so different from the tense, guarded look she'd had when she first woke up. "I think we're good exactly as we are." That night, after Maisie went to bed, they sat on the small balcony of the apartment, watching the park below, now dark and quiet. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," April said softly. "Believe what?" "Everything. How my life changed. How it could have ended so differently." Silas understood. He often had the same thoughts. What would his life be like if he hadn't gone to the restaurant that night? If he hadn't noticed Maisie on the bench? But it didn't end differently, he said. It ended like this. It didn't end at all, really, April corrected, smiling. We're still in the middle of the story. Silas liked that perspective. And it's a good story, he added. April laughed softly. Better than I expected, that's for sure. It was Maisie's idea to have a picnic in the park that Sunday. The weather was particularly pleasant, one of those perfect late spring days before the summer heat set in. Silas arrived early with a picnic basket prepared by Lumiere's chef, sandwiches, salads, desserts. April contributed a bottle of homemade lemonade. Maisie insisted on bringing her art set and, of course, button and pocket, joined now by a third plush friend, a little otter named Splash. They found a spot under a large tree. April spread out a checkered blanket. Maisie's choice. Real picnics need checkered blankets, and everyone knows that. It was a typical Sunday in the park scene, a family enjoying the good weather, eating, talking, laughing. The kind of normalcy they'd fought so hard to regain. Silas caught himself watching April and Maisie interact. Their resemblance was clearer now. The same hand gestures, the same frown when concentrating. April had regained her weight, her skin showing a healthy glow from time spent outdoors. The scars remained, but they no longer defined her appearance. Maisie ran around them, chasing a yellow butterfly, laughing with that carefree joy children have. April watched her with a smile, leaning back against the tree trunk. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing Silas's contemplative look. "How strange life is," he answered honestly. "A year ago, I didn't even know you two existed." April nodded, understanding. "And now here we are, having a Sunday picnic as if it's always been like this. Do you have regrets?" The question slipped out before Silas could stop it. It was something that occasionally worried him, whether April might feel pressured to keep him in their lives out of gratitude. She looked at him, surprised. "Regret meeting you, having you in our lives. How could I?" "It wasn't really a voluntary choice, was it?" he pointed out. "Circumstances sort of threw us together." April paused, considering. "Circumstances introduced us," she said at last. "But staying was a choice. Yours, mine, Maisie's. Every day since then, we've all kept choosing to stay." There was a profound simplicity in her words, a truth that resonated with Silas. Choosing to stay. Yes, that was what he did every day, a choice renewed each morning when he woke up thinking of them. Maisie returned at that moment, throwing herself onto the blanket between them. "I'm hungry," she declared dramatically, as if she hadn't eaten in days. Silas and April laughed, the serious moment dissolving into lightness. They began unpacking food, filling plates, pouring drinks. Between bites of a sandwich, she proclaimed, "The best in the whole wide world." Maisie studied the two adults with that perceptive look she sometimes got. "You know," she said thoughtfully. "It's funny." "What's funny, honey?" April asked. "You stayed," Maisie said, looking at Silas. "And you came back," she continued, turning to her mother. Everybody kept their promise. A moment of silence followed, as if the whole world paused to acknowledge the depth of that innocent observation. April was the first to move, pulling Maisie into a tight hug. Silas felt an emotion tighten in his own throat, a knot he couldn't swallow. Everybody kept their promise. The words lingered, echoing even after they finished the meal and packed up, even as Maisie insisted on one more loop around the park before going home. Even as they walked back to the apartment, Maisie between them, holding both their hands and occasionally hopping. Later that evening, once Maisie was in bed and Silas was preparing to leave, April walked him to the door. "What Maisie said today," she began, and Silas nodded. "I know." A comfortable silence stretched between them, the kind that needs no filler. "You really did stay," April finally said, her voice soft but sure, "when you didn't have to." "And you really came back," Silas replied, "when you could have given up." "Good night, Silas," April said at last, standing on tiptoe to gently kiss his cheek. "Good night, April." As he drove home that night, Silas caught himself smiling for no apparent reason, or maybe for a very specific one. The realization that, for the first time in a long time, perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not at a critically acclaimed restaurant, not in an important business meeting, not building his empire, but in a sunlit park, on a checkered blanket, with a woman who had faced death and returned, and a little girl who never stopped believing that promises were meant to be kept. He was exactly where he should be. Not all promises are broken by abandonment. Some are fulfilled by people who choose to stay, even when they don't have to.